Hey everyone, welcome to Critical Faculty Channel. I'm your host, Hani Salim. Today we are going to be having new friend of mine, actually, somebody who I've got to know from another friend of mine, Derek of Myth Vision. And I've actually listened in a couple of times to his podcast, and I found something quite refreshing while providing very important information. So please join me in welcoming my new friend, Derreck Bennett. Hello, Derek. How are you?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. I think we've got to apologize to the audience here. You and I had some issues this morning, technical and otherwise, but we've made it.
We've made it this far, by God.
I'm sure. I'm sure he really looks after us because never mind those who are dying of cancer and having bigger issues, but he attends to more important things sometimes.
As long as things are good in my little bubble. Sheer solipsism. Sheer solipsism.
Oh, can we help it? We laugh about it, but it's at the end of the day, that's your little world. We only live inside our heads, huh?
Well, that's the job of a philosopher, is to look a little more broadly.
Fantastic. Well, I want to start by introducing Derek. And Derek, I got to know you from the Vision podcast and our common friend Neil as well. And I do quite like something about the way you present the information. You seem, I know, especially with your background, and you'll get to tell us in your own words very soon. But you don't take things very seriously, maybe on the surface. Maybe that's what people can see. But there might be something a little bit deep beneath. But is your laughter at the face of the world when the going gets tough? What does it do for you?
Well, I mean, the thing of it is, I actually do in fact take all of this very seriously. I've always been a deep thinker. I mean, since I was a little tyke, and so I'm very much a philosopher at heart, and I'm very deeply introspective, and I really I mean, the time that I've time and energy I put into studying this material and just dwelling in it, living in it. I take it very seriously, but at the same time, laughter is the best medication, right? And when it comes to the absurdities inherent in all of this, like, I mean, I think what it is for people like me, who are engaged in secular critical studies of ancient religion and Christianity and the Bible and so forth. Yes, we take it very seriously, but those on the apologetics end of things, I mean, just the inherent absurdity of trying to propose that any of this is actually historically true, that our eternal fate is really on the line here. That to me is so laughable that yeah, I have to make fun of it. I have to laugh at it. I think it's yes, we should engage very seriously and very critically with these people, but I think ridicule is sometimes in order, precisely because it deserves to be exposed for how ridiculous it really is, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, people mistake ridiculing and laughing at the face of adversity as something ridiculous and stupid, but I think it's a serious business. I'm watching right now TV series called The House of the Dragon, which is sort of a prequel to Game of Thrones, and Daemon, who is like a dragon rider, his beloved wife dies because of childbirth and complications, and she was in so much agony. So she asked her dragon. She said Dracarys, which is the word for light me up and just finish this pain. And in the funeral, everybody's crying and whinging, and he loved her so much more than anyone else, and he was the only one laughing. And people thought he was crazy, and sometimes people laugh because they're hurt too much, and people don't understand. People don't see that. They think it's crazy. But sometimes it's the only thing to do to keep your sanity.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the case for me as well. I mean, I've been to hell and back, just in this life and in this world, which I'm pretty sure is the only one we have. Um, uh, and over the past several months have been extremely difficult for me as well. I've just I'm doing far better than I ever did in the past, that's for sure. But it has been grueling at times, and yeah, I mean to make light of it and to be able to just to laugh at yourself and the absurdity of what's going on around us, you got to be able to do that. Like I said, laughter really, it really is the best medication. And sometimes, I come from an AA background, Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't put a lot of stock in AA. I do not go to meetings. I have a lot of problems with it. But there's also a lot that I take from it as well. There are good values and principles. There's much to be gained from it for all that I don't like. And one of the things that was often told to me was don't take yourself so damn seriously. Um, and I think I just kind of have um, I've always kind of naturally had a sense of humor anyway. So absolutely, I draw upon that. I see it as an asset, as a strength, and I draw upon that to help me get through tough times. You bet, and it works.
And I adore it because you get things like the life of Brian. I have to apologize if the noise happening in the background. That's my end, not Derek's. I've got the solar installation happening at the moment, so I'm gonna try to speak as least today to sort of mask this noise in the background. But yes, I
Can you
completely
tell them to
agree with
knock it off? The hell are you
you.
people doing down? What are you doing down under?
Well,
Jesus.
today is a sunny day, and with solar, weather is so important, and this has been postponed a number of times. So today is a beautiful sunny day, and they want to do as many little tasks and jobs as they can do in that one sunny day.
In my reality here in Kentucky, there's no sun right now. You understand? It's dark.
All right. Okay, so I am going to share a couple of things here that my friend Derek is the owner of. And if you just hold on a second, I'm going to share. First of all, I'd like to share your channel. This is Ethiologica, Derek's own YouTube channel. He does interesting videos, not too long, which is brilliant. You don't go for hours on end. You deliver your message quite wittily, and in whether in 20 minutes or so, sometimes less, you drive a point, and that's brilliant. I like that quite a lot. So, do you want to say anything about your channel?
Man, just get in there, dive in, subscribe, watch these videos, whatever interests you. If you like it, please support me on my Patreon. Um, I have what I specialize in particularly is comparative religion. So looking at the various parallels between Christianity and other biblical stories and the kind of stuff we find in the ancient world. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. A lot of people are familiar with Zeitgeist or maybe what they've read from Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code or Bill Maher's Religulous or that kind of thing. Um, a lot of that stuff is bunk, and you have to wade through the garbage to actually get at what's real. So, am I still in the show? Yes, it looks like I am. So what I do is I rely on mainstream scholarship, actual, vetted scholars, academics, primary source texts and iconography to get at actual legitimate parallels that you find in the ancient world with Christianity. I'm going after what's actually legitimately there and can actually be evidenced. So you'll find a lot of that in my work, and then of course I wield that in my doing counter apologetics as well.
This is fantastic, Derek. And of course, also, and I'm going to share this in a second, you wrote a book, and I'm going to share that on your Amazon page. And it's called, you want to tell us about this book?
Yes, it's Addictus, a non-believer's path to recovery. So there I share my experience as a recovering alcoholic and addict, the struggles that I've been through with that. I mean, it really gets into it gets pretty heavy into the some of the more gut-wrenching details of my life and my experience. But I make a point of sharing the fact that I'm doing this. I'm a recovering person without any belief in a God or the supernatural or really any reliance on Alcoholics Anonymous, which I find to be just too religiously oriented for my taste. I did, as a matter of fact, relapse sometime after writing that book. I'm always careful to be upfront and honest about that. And of course, I said in the book that that could happen. I was honest then too. But I've been sober for 4 years now. So this is my longest stint of sobriety yet. So we're going strong right now, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. And regardless of the relapse, there's definitely something to be gained from reading that book.
Something I want to ask you, Derek. When you say sober, that means you don't touch alcohol whatsoever?
No alcohol and no narcotics, none.
Right. So if you have a taste, that'll be it. Can you ever, you think of yourself a future where you can enjoy a drink or even a piss up session with your mates for one night and then forget about it the next day? It's never happened and it's gone. Yeah.
Can't,
Once you have a taste, it's you're latched up.
it's always a slippery slope, and believe me, I have had bouts where I was able to drink again and do so successfully without any major issues for like a matter of time, maybe months on end, but it would always eventually catch up with me. It's sort of like, once you've engaged in a behavior like that where you're using alcohol or a pill as a coping mechanism, it's almost like having a file downloaded on a computer that you can never erase. That behavior, that coping mechanism is always here. And unless science ever finds a way to get in there and lobotomize that particular part of your brain, it's always going to be there with you for life. There's no getting rid of it. So, if I tell myself, man, maybe just one beer tonight with the friends, and you know what I mean, it's if I get away with it and I'm okay for that night, I'll tell myself, well, gee whiz, I was okay then. Maybe I can do it again. And it's the same story again and again and again. Eventually it'll bite me in the ass and I'll be
Yeah.
right back on my knees again. So abstinence is really the only answer.
Were you alcoholic when you were Christian as well at the same time?
No, I wouldn't know. I developed alcoholism. It became chronic in my mid to late 20s, definitely by my late 20s. And I had doubts about Christianity in adolescence. By the time I developed alcoholism, I would not have called myself a Christian anymore. I think I was still open to the idea of a God of some sort. I flirted with ideas like deism and pantheism and so forth, but not a Christian by this point anymore. No.
So this is a question that's going to sort of arise in a lot of religious people's minds. Do you think the faith in Christ somewhat protected you from, because I don't know if you agree with me, your addiction was satisfied anyway because religion is some sort of an opiate, according to Karl Marx. So you didn't need drugs at that point because you had your drug, which is being religious, you think? Maybe?
I mean, that would just be a massive oversimplification. For one thing, I've been in and out of enough rehabs to know that this is an illness that afflicts everyone, every walk of life. It doesn't, it's an equal opportunity disease. So I've met plenty of recovering or still um, still in active addiction, people who believe in God or are Christians or whatever whatever you have it, and they struggle no less. Many of them die. Um, so one's religious faith, just it has absolutely positively nothing to do with whether or not they're going to be successful in recovery.
This is very interesting. You've got lots of mates who are sort of supporting you and probably gone through the journey, and you seem to have helped a few people along the way. So that's brilliant to hear. Must be very refreshing. Um, so obviously, free will is bullshit. Give it all of that.
I don't know, man. I don't know that on that one. I've only scratched the surface of that whole philosophical issue. I love what Christopher Hitchens said. He said, "Of course we have, of course we have free will. We have no
We have no
choice."
choice.
Um, I understand the reasons for thinking that it all really is determinism at bottom and that free will is completely illusory, but I can't help thinking, and this is just bare bones intuition here, that's all, that we have free will in some sense. I could be wrong about that.
No, you're
um,
right. I'm of that school of thought. There is something called compatibilism. I'm a compatibilist.
right,
So
right.
it's compatibilist is somebody
I
who's
would call
determinist.
myself a compatibilist, but that's not based on any like really in-depth years long study or anything. That's
But
just from my, like I said, my rather um, scratching the surface of that issue.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's quite reasonable. Daniel Dennett advocates this sort of position because a compatibilist is at bottom is a determinist. All what we're saying is we can talk until the cows come home about how deterministic things are, but still, if I'm going to ask you what time or what sort of meal would you like to have tomorrow for dinner, Derek, and you will think between beef, chicken, or vegetarian pizza. You've just had a conversation with me about no free will, but we will still go out and forget about all of that and act as if we do have free will.
Mhm.
So, and Daniel then said, hey, we are not the victims of that illusion. We are the beneficiaries of that illusion. This is an evolutionary trick
I like
to
that.
to give you the illusion that you're a free agency, so you can be responsible, so we can hold each other responsible. Because remember, even though we are deterministic, we're still going to put people away for murders, even though we know that they might have been hardwired to do so
Right. Right.
for obvious reasons. So, but things like that, like being hardwired, you have a gene for, if I may say, obviously there isn't a gene, but there's that disposition of getting addicted to anything, and that could be, people think of only alcohol and drugs, but their addiction have so many faces.
And in that sense, too, I'm able to forgive myself for my past, understanding that had anyone else been through the same experiences and had the same genetic predisposition, whatever you want to call it, they probably would have wound up alcoholic or addicts too. So, um, I'm able to look at that deterministic factor and understand that that was just a perfect storm that was waiting to happen. And all I can do now is just pick up and move forward, learn from it, and be a better person. Or
Okay,
so I'd like to think.
let's get into something a little bit other than you. So enough in the limelight, and let's put the limelight on your brain and how it thinks. And how long were you Christian for?
Oh goodness. I mean, my Christianity is pretty much limited to my childhood.
Mhm.
My mother was very devout, but interestingly enough, we did not grow up going to church. We were, I would come to find out, Universalists. I didn't know there was a name for it back then, but this was passed down from my grandparents on my mom's side. We believed that Christ would, in the end, ultimately save every last living soul. How could a loving Father, consign anyone to eternal torment if we are His children, and He loves us as a Father? So we reasoned that, of course, no one's going to end up in hell forever. Maybe just temporarily, and so Christ's redeeming act would ultimately save everyone. I don't think that's what the Bible says, but that's how we looked at it. And we took this a step further by believing that we took John 3:16 quite literally. He who believeth in me shall not die, but have everlasting life. We thought we were immortal. We thought that by believing in Christ fully in this manner, that we would never die. We would never have to suffer death. And I suppose what they must have thought, that Christ would return within our very lifetimes, as so many Christians do. And so as a child, I actually had this strange sense of immortality. I thought I could never die. My father was a little unsure about that. He just never knew quite what to think about it. Sure enough, he gets diagnosed with cancer. And after a matter of, I don't know, within a year's time, we lost him. He on his deathbed, he accepted this message of physical salvation. We called it. That was our name for it. And he died nonetheless. So I think that from a very young age, I would have been about 12 at this time, I began to understand, well, I mean, clearly this very unorthodox Christian view was not right. That much is certainly true. So a lot of people might say, well, Derreck, you just didn't have a true understanding of what, normative Christianity actually is. But it was more than that. It was the realization that maybe what our parents, our culture, our elders, our authorities, maybe what they tell us is not right, is not true, generally speaking, and that I needed to seek out my own answers. So I think that was a catalyst for wanting to know more and to understand better. So yeah, I mean, that's not as simple as the straw man that you so often hear from Christians, which is that you had this devastating moment in your life, and so you became angry with God and rejected Him. That does not really encapsulate my experience. Rather, it made me more driven to understand what's really going on here, more curious, so to speak.
And look, so be it. Sometimes the first reaction is emotional. There are lots of psychologists who argue that, and even David Hume, the philosopher, argued that everything that enters your brain happens at an emotional level, and then we try to rationalize it. So maybe it started emotional, and there's no shame. I mean, we are emotional beings. We've evolved to emotions for a reason, to feel empathy, to feel the group. All these things are handy emotions that help us survive. But eventually, you'll after that rage about that, God saying, "How dare you do that? That's the opposite of what I heard about you." And then you start looking into things, because once that sacredness have dropped, because remember, there's a shield. Like being a universalist, you'd know that the morality of human beings have actually superseded God's morality. We couldn't take what's been said and what's been acknowledged throughout the Bible from day one. God's chosen people. He chose certain people to have a covenant with over other people. He freed them from Egypt, and you think now slavery is going to be abandoned, but no, he's asked them to enslave other nations. So it was always to do with his favorite people. So there's always you're the in group and you're the out group. But the good human beings say, no, God couldn't be that. It's like when you're so blindly in love with somebody, you don't see they're probably cheating on you, and you can't see it until somebody said, mate, she is just like, and a penny drops, and then you find out first reaction is always going to be emotional. And then you start to look back and rationalize and understand and even start to think, maybe I was a culprit. Maybe she cheated on me because there are a couple of things that I've done and I should have done better. And you start to take a breath and you start to understand the situation in a calm and rational way. But because this is the attack from Christian, they think the whole thing is emotional and it stays emotional throughout. So was there a point then after the discovery or the suspicion that you start reading the text and he said, oh, something isn't right?
Well, again, this happened at a very early age, adolescence. And so I think I was just kind of in limbo for a while, not really sure what to think or what to believe, and I can't even say that I remember harboring any kind of anger toward God. Um, at least not that I recall. It was more of, huh, you know what I mean? Like, hmm, I don't know what to make of things anymore. I just wasn't sure. It really wasn't until my it was my mid 20s. A close friend of mine from high school, he wound up more or less converting to Christianity or back to Christianity after having been more or less agnostic, it seemed. And it was when that happened that, because he and I had always kind of been on the same page about all of this stuff. So when he converted, that's what kind of lit the spark to make me say, I ought to take another look at this. I mean, I certainly had my doubts and I had my suspicions, but I was ready to really kind of dive in there and see what do I make of all this myself. And so, it's at this point in my mid 20s, I'm almost 45 now. The internet is finally bubbling up, and we've got Wikipedia and all this and Google, and I start doing some research. And what I started off on the wrong foot. I started off reading Acharia S's Truth Be Known website, where she goes into the kind of stuff I was talking about earlier, unsubstantiated parallels with like Horus and Mithras and Prometheus and so forth. And I thought there was really something to that. And then indeed, I did read Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code and thought there was something to that. And so that wasn't enough for me. That just wasn't enough for me. I had to go digging a little deeper than all that. And sure enough, I found out that a lot of this stuff was bunk. But some of it was in the ballpark. At least it was in the ballpark. And so I found, of course, I found apologetics. I found JP Holdings Tectonics website, where he did all of the apologetics thing in a very dickish manner as well. He might have rubbed off on me a little bit. He created a monster. But then I wound up finding actual legitimate scholarship as well. I found the work of I found Richard Carrier and Robert M. Price online, and I loved their work. I wasn't real sure about mythicism, but I liked what I appreciated what they were putting out there, and a lot of it was making a lot of sense to me. And then, of course, I came to realize, well, I can't just read Carrier and Price and Doherty. I need to be branching out and getting a broader view of mainstream academia. So I branched off into other works, some stuff that they themselves had cited, and really began to, over the years, put all the pieces of the puzzle together, at least as well as one can, and formulate my own ideas and thoughts about how Christianity originated, how it developed, and what the reality probably is, given everything that I've looked into. So, long story short, I did wind up finding legitimate scholars, learning how to actually do bona fide research and digging into primary source texts. and I've benefited from it greatly, and I've got a wealth of knowledge. I don't know everything, I never will, but I know a lot.
So you don't hold any mythicist beliefs. You're more into the Bart Ehrman type of narrative,
Yeah,
but
I
you
entertained mythicism for a good while until I'm just never one to be satisfied with what anyone else has to tell me. I've got to seek things out for myself. I have to, and that if you're a truth seeker, if that's what you care about more than anything else, I always tell people I'm a truth seeker first and an atheist second. Atheism isn't necessarily even what I prefer. It's just the ineluctable conclusion I've reached based on all of my seeking. So the truth matters more to me than anything else. And yes, I do follow the evidence wherever it leads, the evidence, the arguments, and so forth. There are Christian apologists who like to poke fun at that, and it's not funny because we're doing it and they're not. Um, so yeah, I where was I going with this? Mythicism. I entertained the idea for a while, but reading Tim O'Neill, you may not like him. He comes off as a jerk, but at the end of the day, this is not a popularity contest. A lot of what he was saying was making a lot of sense to me. He had some really good points. A friend of mine, Dave Allen, he does great work in this vein. Um, Looking at the historicist arguments and some of the things they had to say about some of these mythicist talking points, that began to fall away. And I wouldn't say that I'm absolutely certain that there was a historical Jesus, but simply that a historical Jesus makes the most sense to me. It's
more plausible. Yeah.
the most plausible, and the whole the cognitive dissonance theory of Christian origins, wherein you got a scenario where this guy, they're looking to him as God's chosen Messiah, and he winds up getting crucified instead, which is not at all what they had in mind. You'd have to do some rethinking about what's going on here, and would that mean that they just pack up their bags and go home? Hell no, of course not. Um, if we've learned anything from the 2020 election, you can see how people's minds work when there's a fervent political or religious movement at hand. People begin rationalizing very quickly and will come up with whatever they can in order to save this fervent idea or belief that they hold. You see this in religious movements all the time, and it makes so much sense when it comes to Christian origins that I just can't deny how probable I think it is.
We've seen it in modern times. Those doomsday end of the world, sort of the 2012 or something like that, and it doesn't happen. They go, oh, hold on a second. Here is a revision. God sent an angel who said, I've actually looked into humanity, and they were worth spending more time on. So the year has changed, or God has changed his mind because he had mercy on us, or sorry, our calculations was wrong. There's always a way to revise that belief and not abandon it, and actually it strengthen it by adding an extra depth or layer. The human brain is incredible.
And it's so funny to me, the apologists think that we're grasping at straws, providing this as an alternative explanation, as alternative to what the Bible actually has to say. And it's like, are you kidding me? This is quite probable. This is a very sensible, very plausible explanation, given what we know about how people behave in these fervently religious and political movements. It makes a lot of sense.
Have you watched the debate between Price and Ehrman?
I did.
Yeah, that's
I think
interesting.
that was one of the that's where the ice beneath my feet began to crack when it came to mythicism. I was expecting Price to wipe the floor with him, and it was the other way around. And I couldn't help but look at that and think, yee, um, maybe this mythicism thing isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Now, you can't just say that because someone was the victor in a debate, that must mean that they're right. William
True,
Lane Craig has beaten a lot of atheists in debates, and I'm pretty sure he's still dead wrong. He's just a really good debater.
true.
So, that alone wasn't enough, but it certainly was cause to look a little more deeply. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. That that I think that one was sort of managed by Matt Dillahunty at the time,
Mhm.
and it was a very interesting conversation. Both are good friends of mine, and both are atheists. See, this
Yeah.
is where it gets really
Mhm.
interesting. So even if Jesus existed historically, it still doesn't change a thing. He was just a
Oh,
man.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
No. And
So,
I'm far less optimistic about what we can know about the historical Jesus than someone like Bart Ehrman is. Now, of course, I'm not the scholar that he is either. I won't even pretend to have anywhere near as much knowledge as he does about these things. But I, I think even he, we can use various tools and methods to kind of extricate who Jesus was and what he's probably, excuse me, what he probably said. And I don't know. I think we can only know just the broadest outlines about who this guy may have been. Probably an apocalyptic preacher, perhaps with some zealous tendencies. Wound up getting crucified by the Romans, and the following that he had uh, blossomed into a whole new religion, and that's about it. That's about it.
that's yeah, and I don't need to think about anything because at the end of the day, the one bit that I want to get out of that he was no man walking on water, no man God walking on water, type of personality. There are so many issues with Christianity. Other than that, I mean, it starts with God the Father. With the Torah and the Old Testament is filled with crazy shit, like literally. It's incredible, like crazy stuff, like wearing a shirt that's made of two fabrics. Like you're feeling a bit cold on Saturday, and you're trying to gather some sticks to warm yourself and the family, and you get killed for it. Moses gone to God and say, "Hey, what do I do?" So kill him. I was like, okay. So you get killed for anything back in the old days. It's incredible.
Yeah, and to think that any of this is actually inspired by any kind of divine source, it's so obviously a product of its time and place in history. That's for me, um, I don't claim to know with absolute certainty whether or not there is a God of some sort. I don't see any good reason to think so, and I don't think any of the philosophical arguments for a God are all that compelling. But as it relates to the biblical God, to Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim, just no. I'm sorry. It's I cannot take that any more seriously than I do Zeus or Odin. I just can't. So the you know I'm I remain agnostic on the question of whether or not there is a God, though I'm still technically also an atheist because the two terms are not mutually exclusive. I don't believe in a God, regardless. But as it relates to the biblical God and whether or not Christianity is actually true in the way Christians say, I say absolutely not. And I'm sorry. I don't pull any punches with this. It's of course it's not. They'll go on believing it thanks to the same cognitive dissonance reduction that probably gave way to it. But I'm practically certain that all of that is ultimately a product of its time and place in history. And
Yeah.
when we look at the adjacent beliefs and ideas and philosophies and mythologies of the ancient world, it's that's just obviously cut from the same cloth, and I don't see how anyone cannot possibly see that.
Uh, I'm glad you talked about atheism and some definitions here because some of the things that the faithful friends of ours understand atheism to be is the assertion and the denial of the existence of God. And I I spent so many hours trying to explain, no, that's not atheism. We actually do not assert there is no God, and it's very, very important to make that definition. The evidence provided to us right now is not convincing, and if you provide something convincing at some point, we can change our minds. We're not dogmatic about that. But whatever has been put on the table so far hasn't been convincing, and therefore we hold the belief that I cannot prove that there is no God, but I cannot prove there are no unicorns or a teapot rotating around Jupiter or any other planets, like Russell said. And I'm not going to live my life according to something that I can prove. What I'm going to do is I'm going to suspend that belief until such time that there is proper evidence put in front of me for me to consider and change my mind. And I'm going to continue to live the human experience of, going through life, trying to make a decent living, trying to find out. Because remember, even when that God existed, humanity still have to put their orders in sort of in a straight line in terms of how to build the Plato's city of virtues and how to find the right path. And God provided very little. Countries that have followed the exact rules of God. Israel does not follow any of the Mosaic laws. They've been abandoned. They're rubbished. They are secular at best. Christianity, there are no such rules, but even things like divorce and things like that, they have sort of changed and evolved over time, and humanity found loopholes to circumvent that. Even in Islam, I'm half ex-Muslim. My father was a Muslim, so I left two religions in one go within a couple of years. None of the Muslim countries apply Sharia laws. Where the beheading and the cutting of the hands, it's only couple that are sort of failed economies and failed countries anyway. So what kind of God that gets superseded by more reasonable human laws? Don't you think the word of God should be a lot more sort of steady and eternal than a few centuries that sort of lasted, and then humanity went, there is something really inherently wrong about stoning people to death?
Yeah, so the Abrahamic God is just completely out of the question for me. And a personal God is just seems really far-fetched. Certainly if we're talking about omni God, right? A God who is omnibenevolent, uh, you know, omnipotent and omniscient. I think that's doubtful for a whole variety of reasons. Um, and then what do you have left? Maybe some kind of vague pantheism or whatever. I just yeah, it's just not there for me. I'm I'm not seeing it. So yeah, I mean, what's left? There are those like Steve McRae who say that, well, your atheism is a belief too. You know what I mean? You can't simply fall back on you have a lack of belief, because the corollary of that is that you have a belief that there are no gods. Okay, that's fine as long as you understand it's not an assertion of, what I mean, absolute certainty. Sure. um Fine. I believe that there is no God. I believe there are no gods. um I don't care that that's equally a belief. All that matters to me is, if none of this is omniscient, then whose belief is the most rational, the most plausible, um the best argument um to the explanation for what we witness in the real world. And I think we've got it, buddy.
I don't think Zoroastrian religion, that's the old Persian religion, had the omni attributes for a very simple reason. It's a comment here that's important, because it was a dualistic god. It was Ahura Mazda, it was an evil. So with that god, it can't possibly be an omni god, because it's duality of gods anyway. So actually, that is the problem of evil explained away. One of the biggest problems in the problem of evil or suffering is God claims to be omni and he's one. But once you divide that God's entity into an evil one and a good one, the problem of evil is gone, and also the omni attributes are gone because you can't be all present if there are few of you or omni anything. Um,
I concur with that. I love Jason from Dragons and Genesis. The guy's great. He is, of course, a mythicist, and I won't deny him that. We're on the same page for the most part. So it's for me, it's not a. I'm not going to go to war with these guys. I don't care enough to. I don't. At the end of the day, I don't care whether or not there was a historical Jesus. I think it's most probable. We're not going to lock horns about it. I'm just not. Who cares? But that's right. Zoroastrianism was dualistic, and that was their means for explaining why, when you did have a good god like Ahriman, you still had evil in the world. Well, it's because, I'm sorry, a good god
Mazda.
like Ahura Mazda, excuse me.
Yeah.
Ahura Mazda was the good god. Ahriman was the evil
It's the
god.
evil
He
God.
was,
Yeah.
I think, just as powerful, though he still gets destroyed in the end. But that was their explanation for why you had, evil and suffering, even in the face of a benevolent God. I think the omni attributes, I think a lot of this is rooted in Greek philosophy. It was from there that we got these Platonic and metaphysical features and attributes, the whole idea of an indestructible, incorporeal body like we find in the Pauline corpus and so forth. So I think Greek metaphysics had more to do with that than anything else.
Because we get first to hear about it from, well, according to Socrates, who we not quite sure if he even existed because all of his writing was conveyed by his student Plato. And it was the Euthyphro. It's a conversation between Socrates and Euthyphro. And it's the classic one about if there is a God who's omnipotent, why there is evil, is he willing, does he want to, destroy evil? Can he? And if he can't, then he's not omnipotent. That dilemma. It's a very famous old one.
That's Epicurus who's responding to that very kind of thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And then you end up with the theodicies that all the Christianity sort of build a lot from St. Aquinas to all other apologists, all the way to William Lane Craig, who's trying to apologize for some of the issues in Christianity. But then you have the evidential problem of evil, which is basically to do with gratuitous suffering and extreme suffering. And there is no answer to that. What do you do with gratuitous suffering? That's nothing to do with free will, because that's what they use at the moment. Because you have a free will agency, you're allowed to do evil. But what about natural evils and things that we cannot control? What do you do with that?
There's no good answer to that anyway. We look to in the book of Job, what is God's answer to Job? In Job 41, God is bragging about how he is able to subdue Leviathan, who was nothing short of a dragon in that chapter. He's smoke and fire coming from his nostrils. I've heard Christians try to downplay this as, it's just a dinosaur or whatever. Yeah, because dinosaurs snorted and breathed smoke and fire. Get out of here. It's a dragon. It's a fire breathing damn dragon. And Yahweh is bragging about how he can subdue this thing. Job can't. So who is Job to demand anything of him? All of the apologetic counters to the problem of evil are simply one or another variant of God works in mysterious ways. It's something we're not meant to understand. And maybe, when we get to the pearly gates, it'll all be explained to us. And my response to that is simply that, it's these mysterious ways in which God works are practically indistinguishable from there simply being no God whatsoever. What's the simpler explanation here? Let Occam's razor rip. I find it hilarious how Christian apologists love to wield Occam's razor when it suits them, or at least when they think it suits them, but they'll ignore it in every other scenario. So they do not apply it consistently. The most parsimonious explanation here is simply that there is no such God. I'm not saying I know that for a fact, but it damn well explains the world we're living in.
That's a very good point, Derek. I mean, we've got data, we've got status quo, we've got things that we can reverse engineer to see what is the most plausible. We've got two hypotheses. One that says there's a creator, one that says no, maybe the universe. Yeah, because it's the argument from contingency. Something, if you go back because of the infinite regress issue that William Lane Craig has, you cannot go back infinitely, and actually you can, according to mathematics. All mathematicians disagreed with William Lane Craig. Yes, you can do that. And if you're going to start with something, how about existence itself is eternal? In past times, you've got different cosmological models that actually can support that. The multiverse is by definition an infinite and infinitely in the past as well existing. So, and nothing supernatural about that. That's exactly what is the existence we're experiencing right now that is conveying itself in all occasions. So all the data that we've got right now, you've prop evolution, cosmology, there is very little that we don't see the intervention of everything is going according to the deterministic initial conditions of physical laws.
Yeah, a lot of what they do in this arena is they misrepresent physics and cosmology. Now, how do I know this? I'll tell you why. It's because I've been in love with science and with astronomy since childhood. I'm genuinely interested in these topics. They're not just my whipping boy for trying to prove a point. And I think that's what it really is to them. It's just something that they exploit in order to try and make their fantasies seem more credible. There are those of us who take an actual, active, genuine interest in physics and cosmology, and that's the kind of person I am. So I'm able to see right through the BS when they try to harness these arguments. And take Craig's misrepresentation of the Big Bang and the Borg-Guth, Vilenkin theorem and whatnot. I mean, all that we really know from this is that the universe began about 13.8 billion years ago, began to expand. We don't know that it began to exist, like actually ontologically pop into existence from non-existence. That's just some far-fetched hypothesis that folks like Craig are pulling out of their butt because they're already committed to the belief in creation ex nihilo, or creation from nothing. But that's not what the physicists are actually saying. It was certainly the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. If you rewind the clock on an ever-expanding universe, you go back and back and back and back and back. It cannot keep doing that infinitely. There comes a point where you reduce it to an absolute minimum. And that would be the point 13.8 billion years ago at which the universe began to expand. To expand, not exist. Or at least we don't know that to be the case, that it began to exist. So there's an equivocation fallacy going on here as well. What was the cause of that expansion? Could it have been some type of quantum vacuum fluctuation? I mean, that makes sense to me, but we really don't know. And to pretend that you have the answers, that you know for a fact that the universe began to exist at this point, which seems, ironically enough, just as far-fetched to me as it seems to them when they say, well, how could something pop into existence from nothing? I agree. I don't think that either. You're the ones who are taking your creation ex nihilo and projecting that onto us and saying, how do you do that without a God? But it's not what we think. We don't agree already with your creation ex nihilo interpretation.
Yes.
I think it makes far more sense that there had to have been something, whether it was a quantum potentiality, some type of quantum gravitational state, or whether there was a pre-existing universe in which you had some kind of bubble nucleation event that gave rise to a whole new universe. We've looked at the Higgs boson, and we can tell that we're living in a vacuum that is ultimately not stable. It's metastable. It could give way to a whole new universe within itself at some point, eons in the future. So there's so many possibilities here that you can't just rest on something popped into existence from nothing. You can't glean that. I could go on about this stuff forever, but I'll let you take the helm for a second there.
No, I'm very fascinated, and that should be the. I mean, we've explained today. I'm going to have to cut it a little bit short because of they have to disconnect the power. So we've got another 10 minutes to go. But that is a very interesting conversation. I think we should have next. If you're like me, interested in physics and cosmology, I would like to, instead of having a broad conversation about everything, we just zone in into maybe the Kalam cosmological arguments, and we actually dissect it because William Lane Craig, I don't know if you've watched his debates with a physicist that I've spoken with, Sean Carroll. This is he put him in his place. I think this is the one where he put him in his place. He should cut the crap. Nobody says that in physics. Alan Guth is my friend. Even Lawrence Krauss said, Alan Guth is my friend. That's not what he says.
Yeah, the Bordet-Guth-Blinken theorem tells us this using classical, relativistic physics. Doesn't tell us what might have happened there in the beginning, assuming there even was such a thing. So, yeah, cut the crap. The fine-tuning argument, too. I don't see how that could possibly work. I find it interesting. How does one explain the cosmological constants? I don't propose to know. I do know this.
I'm having, by the way, Derek, sorry to interrupt. I'm having a conversation with Richard Carrier on this very topic in November.
Great.
Yes.
One of the points I bring, and I've never seen anyone else bring this up, is that, Carrier, of course, will mention that the vast majority of the universe is absolutely inhospitable to life. I mean, it's just deadly lethal, the vast majority of it. But what the apologists, they respond by saying, no. God fine-tuned the universe just so as to be permissible to life, to be life-permitting. Fine, I'll meet you there. The problem is that this universe, which is ultimately expanding into oblivion, there'll be a heat death. It will only have been life-permitting for just the tiniest fraction of a moment in its overall existence.
You know what's my problem with
the of a billionth of a percent. That's the teeny tiny fraction of a window in which life is actually possible, actually permissible in this universe. You mean to tell me that God so values life that that's all he was able to squeeze out? It just does not line up. That is the torpedo in the hull of this fine-tuning argument. And
but there is a problem inherent in this, and this to me the biggest problem. It seems that God is limited here. God has to follow a certain recipe. It's like the recipe of making a cake. You've got to follow some instructions, and if you fail to follow the instructions, there's no cake, right? So even God is determined by certain parameters that if you think God can make a universe that shouldn't exist. You look into the physics, you say, shit, that makes no sense, but we're still here. But it's based on a certain criteria, and if God needs to follow that criteria to make life possible, that means there's something that supersedes the ability of God, like like morality or the laws of logic or anything. If God is only the conveyor of these things, that means they actually exist independent of God. Therefore, he's not a god. He's just maybe like an older civilization, or it could be a computer system that is the simulation hypothesis actually at this point is actually more plausible, that we have destroyed ourselves in the future and we're just rewinding. We are the rewinding back of what the hell has happened along the way, sort of thing.
But as always, they'll have some kind of ex post facto rationalization for all of this. It's they can't just let it go at that. Oh, that makes sense. Maybe I'm full of crap. They'll come up with something. But I mean, in terms of what I'm talking about, if life is only permissible for the tiniest fraction of a moment, how do you I'm still here. How do you square that with a God to whom life is supposedly so valuable that was the reason he created a universe to begin with, so as to have moral agents? They're only there for the for just a fraction of a moment. I'm not buying it.
Yes, yes, there are so many issues, and I'm glad you're interested in science, because this is where I spend most of my time. I have a lot of Arabic broadcasts because this is where I'm spending my time, mostly on the Middle East. Is just the amount of ignorance in everywhere possible about evolution, cosmology is just absolutely prevalent, and it's affecting people's lives. So I do broadcast in Arabic because this area needs the most love. But I want my next conversation with you, Derek, to be about something I want to pick up something scientific, and you can tell me. I mean, I like the fine tuning, and I'm going to do that with Richard Carrier. But what about that Kalam cosmological argument revisited? I'd like to probe the science with you and see if William Lane Craig is actually onto something, or he is, as you said, misrepresenting science to get to a certain point. He's using science as a tool to reach God. He's not interested in science whatsoever.
Doesn't strike me. I mean, he's got a lot of the science down, as well as he chooses to understand it in order to construct his argument. But there's no real passion there. Do you see William Lane Craig sharing photos of the James Webb Space Telescope and saying, "My goodness, look at the beauty here"? I mean, the only reason he would ever do so would be to defend his superstition. There's no real those of us who really love science because of our innate curiosity about the world, we can tell if someone else is just faking it. And they're fake. They're just exploiting it. It's just their whipping boy. And that's so off-putting to those of us who take an actual, genuine, active interest in this stuff. It's so off-putting.
He said it plainly, Derek. He said, if the science contradicts or in opposition to what God says, I have to go with what God says. I mean, that was cutting to the chase. It just, it came out. I mean, it just, that's what it is. He's very interesting. He's a good debater, though. And I must say, I must give him, even Hitchens, said he's the one that puts the God's fear in the hearts of atheists, or something to that effect.
Well, he's a great rhetorician, no doubt about it. But he's said so many absurd things over his long career that I don't see how any rational person can take him seriously. I just don't.
Yeah. If you're not philosophically or scientifically trained, you be wowed by his use of words. It sounds coherent. He puts in a case. He's very organized about his thoughts. He doesn't do the Gish Gallop thing. He's very neat and precise, but it's still bullshit. John Geyer, thank you so much for the super chat. That's obviously tongue in cheek there, and it could be. I mean, it could be, and then it'll have to be mice. But it could be. What if in evolution there is species that is evolved older than us? We're only the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old in a universe of 13.8. If there is a civilization that is only 1 to 2 billion years older than us, imagine the vast difference in knowledge it would be. It'd be incredible.
It would absolutely be incredible.
We would have worshipped ourselves if somebody from 5,000 years ago arrived now, and you're on your Android phone, making all these things. You go, what? Where are? Who are you? You must be a god. That's us. And no speciation. You would have, if you mated with that woman, you still have offspring.
And given this UAP stuff, maybe they're already here, though I do remain skeptical. I'd love to think it's true, but as is with our nature, just because we want something to be the case, just because we wish it were the case, we'll never allow that to guide us or mislead us in our search for truth. I'd love to think that those UAPs are aliens that are already here, but that's not enough. Definitely need better evidence.
We could be aliens ourselves if panspermia is
Well,
correct.
we would be to someone else, yeah.
Yeah. If the first cells and the building blocks of life on Earth came from out of Earth, to answer the irreducible complexity and the issues of the time, because they reckon it's not enough time for a complex cell to evolve. Panspermia, where the building blocks are actually sitting, flying from the space. Space is filled up with the building blocks of life, and we are the aliens we seek by the looks of things. Thank you so much, Derreck. I've really enjoyed this conversation. This is such a short time. I really would have preferred a longer conversation, but this is only the beginning. We just
This
said
is
hello
only
to
the
each other.
beginning. We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more.
There's so much more, and offline, I'm gonna organize with you,
Okay.
in a fortnight, a conversation, and that time we're gonna talk about a certain topic and might be prepared for it properly, so we can actually lay down the evidence in front of our audiences.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much, folks. I'm really sorry again for the short broadcast, but maybe that's how it should be. It was just about an hour and 10 minutes, and maybe those 3 hours, 4 hours conversation are a bit too boring for the younger generation. So we need to adapt. Derreck, would you like to finish with anything, please?
Yes, so long, and thanks for all the fish.
Thanks very much, guys. We'll see you later.